Welcome to episode 109 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and producer, Johnny Pham. You know, guys, I just had a first coming into this podcast. I still had the window on my browser opened up with the live stream on YouTube because I just tweeted out the link. And then so that intro music started playing at the same time as the intro music on StreamYard. I thought I was having a stroke. So I'm glad to have made it to the beginning of the show, and I'm very much looking forward to this one. How are you guys doing tonight?
I am doing great. I survived the great Kansas City storm that was last Friday.
Yes.
I drove to the lake in it, and I'm glad that I am a survivor of that storm.
Wow, going to lake goer, eh? Wow, tell us more about it. How's the trip? How's the weather there?
No, I don't think I will.
Oh, okay. Good talk. Thanks for sharing.
Johnny, how are you doing?
Doing good. Doing good. Happy to be here. I feel like this is going to be a good pod. Weather's nice outside, minus like hail an hour ago, but now it's sunny. That's the Colorado weather here.
Yeah. We I was venting to you guys about the weather yesterday. The lovely weather app saying there was no chance of rain, and me hearing hail hitting my office roof and looking outside and seeing it yesterday was not a lot of fun.
See, I just don't trust the Apple Weather app anymore. I have like 3 different apps. So it's like, okay, AccuWeather and the Weather Channel is completely different from the Apple Weather. It's a whole thing. I'll have to go divulge more.
Yeah, well, you know that KC storm, Dalton, was the real deal. I mean, I'm sure some people who are listening to this have seen, or maybe they haven't. Jeff Passan, ESPN Zone, broke his back because he was outside cleaning and a tree that was, I think, damaged just fell on top of him or something like that. And did you have like any funnel clouds or anything near your area? We had a funnel cloud form like 0.2 miles from our house. Never touched down, but was in the sky very close to us.
I didn't get hit by a tree, but multiple times driving out of Kansas City, I had to get out into the road and move tree branches out of the way of the car to continue driving.
And you just were like, yeah, I'm just going to keep driving on this road right now?
Well, the storm was moving east, and the lake I was going to was east. So the two options were drive into the storm or try to eventually get out of the storm, and we eventually got out of the storm.
You know, there's 2 things that you're not going to stop Dalton from doing, Johnny. That's going to the lake and drinking White Claws.
Yep. I won't. Go ahead, Dalton. Finish the sentence.
Drafting Deontay Johnson in the year 2023 of our Lord and Savior.
And that is a good transition. Not really, but it is at least a transition into what this show is actually about today. We've got, obviously, player props coming at you. We have a couple of breaking news items off the top that we'll discuss. And then kind of the main event today, we're talking training camp storylines. Dalton's got the NFC. I've got the AFC. We've both brought a handful-ish of things we're kind of looking out for, some storylines we think you should be following. And also, at least in my case, and Dalton probably a little bit for you, I'm assuming too, how you should be following them, like what kind of things you should be looking out for in all of these different instances. But where we're going to start is finally one of the old guys actually signed with the team between our last podcast and this one. None of the running backs, they're all still out there. Learn Fournette is still trying out for somebody somewhere today. Was it the Patriots, I think?
It was the Patriots.
So,
it was Fournette and Darrell Henderson in the list of retries.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe the Patriots will have themselves a new running back by the time this podcast is in your feeds. And that is definitely a storyline that I won't mention later, but one to follow is just the backup running back carousel is still very much going to be churning. But DeAndre Hopkins, Dalton, a 2-year deal worth $26 million. I think with incentives, it's like worth up to $32 million or something like that, really. But we finally have the destination. It is the Tennessee Titans. This at least leads me to believe that this is probably Ryan Tannehill's team all season this year, unless something goes horribly wrong. But what, in your mind, is the fantasy fallout for DeAndre Hopkins and then the others that we care about in Tennessee? Probably not as much Derrick Henry. I think that pretty much stays the same for the most part, maybe a little bit less pass catching upside. But Traylon Burks and Chigakonkwo, and then to a lesser extent, Kyle Phillips. How are all these things affected by this signing?
Well, first of all, this is one of those times where teams try to win when they shouldn't be. And the Tennessee Titans should just realize they suck and suck for a little while.
Well, they can't suck because Vrabel is just too good, but they are
Correct.
9 wins, probably 8 wins, 8 to 10 wins. That's where they're going to be, and a first round out.
And I think the biggest impact here is going to be Traylon Burks.
Mm-hmm.
Like the entire narrative for him being where he was at, which is like wide receiver 35 on underdog, was who else is going to get all of the targets. And now we have an answer for that. And it's a player who, even late in his career, is significantly better than what we saw from Traylon Burks last season. He wasn't able to have a commanding target share throughout his healthy games, despite there being really no one else on this roster to out-target him. I'm not as concerned about Chigakonkwo. I think that he's going to do fine, in part because he was good last year on a very efficient edge, and there's still room for him to get more targets. Maybe a slight decrease in Derrick Henry's career high 33 targets last season.
And then maybe like if people had aspirations for Tajay Sharps, that past Tennessee Titans,
yes.
Tajay Spears carving out a passing game role. Maybe he still can, but there's just less to go around now.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does hurt all the pass catchers. I wasn't taking Traylon Burks where he was going, and I'm not taking him wherever he drops to, but that's more of an issue with his skill. And then with DeAndre Hopkins, I think I had him at wide receiver 25 before he signed. I'm probably keeping him there as like a low wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. I know a lot of people are going to point to the A.J. Brown early seasons and his success in Tennessee, but he was highly efficient. And I think Hopkins is not an efficient receiver any longer. He's still going to be a high target getter, but there's just not going to be as much volume to go around. So I like him at the low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3.
Yeah, and I, as people know, if they listen to our ranking show, I just opted not to rank Hopkins or Dalvin Cook, Kareem Hunt, all of those guys until they actually got a team. I will probably put Hopkins in that wide receiver 20 to 25 range. It'll be somewhere in there. I'll have to take a deeper look at that, and we'll talk more rankings again next week with the ranks debate show. So I'll probably have an update at that point. But yeah, I'm with you that Hopkins, to me, he's not quite the same guy he used to be, but he's also like, I don't think he's dropped off a cliff yet either. But you look back, that wide receiver 8 stretch last season, once he started playing, to when he stopped playing, basically when they stopped trying to win, down the stretch last year, was obviously you take that production, but it was volume in a very broken offense with the least creative offensive guru this planet has ever seen in Cliff Kingsbury. I think he'll have a very solid year. He'll be good in the intermediate area, good contested catch guy. Like, I think Tannehill and him will have a nice connection, but I think wide receiver 1 days are over for Hopkins, and really the only chance for him to be close to that in a rank, in my opinion, would have been if he went to the Chiefs. Now, I think this 20 to 25 range is probably about right. And you, of course, have the downside that you get none of us thought Julio was done when he got to Tennessee, and then he just was. Now, he has been injured more often than Hopkins, and injury was a big part of it that year for him too. But you, at least as a 31-year-old on a new team and not a great team, you do have some downside that didn't exist with Hopkins in Arizona, and may not have existed quite to this extent in Kansas City, or if he would have ended up in Buffalo, maybe, I don't know. But, and then as for Burks, I do think it affects him too, but I'd have to look. I'll probably only move him down a couple of spots, because it's hard to, it's a kind of a crutch argument either way to say, oh, well, you can say that he's going to benefit from Hopkins taking a number 1 guy, and he can be kind of the 1B in that offense and get lesser coverages and get easier looks and things of that nature. Or you can say that he's going to be hurt by a lack of volume. I think it's probably a combination of both, which is why I'm moving him down a couple spots. Chig, I think his upside is less than what it was before, but I'm not moving him in my ranks, if that makes any sense. Like, tight end is just so bad, and he was like tight end 12, 11 for me. So basically just your back end tight end 1. I'm still keeping him there because I still think, like you said, he's going to have a nice role. And I think this ends really any chance of Kyle Phillips at least having relevancy in drafts this season. And then we'll see about the pass catching for the running backs, but it definitely doesn't help that. So that's kind of my takeaway on all that.
Yeah, and if there was ever a sliver in your mind that the Tennessee Titans were going to trade Derrick Henry, that is not completely out the door. They're still trying to win.
Not happening unless they have a disaster start to the season.
Yes. The only thing I'm concerned about is the Arizona Cardinals made it pretty clear that the end of the season, Hopkins wasn't actually injured and he was just sitting out because they were losing.
Yeah.
And that is a possibility with this team as well, in my opinion.
100%.
And it's just a little concerning that I do think you have to factor that in your decision making. If you're between Hopkins and like somebody else, like Tyler Lockett, I have very similar ADPs in my ranks. I'd probably want to just go Tyler Lockett because I think he's a better player and because he's not going to sit out if they suck.
Yep, absolutely. Next up here, this broke pretty recently before the start of our pod. Breece Hall placed on the PUP list, physically unable to perform, because there was some confusion from me on what exactly being placed on the PUP means at this point in training camp. I just thought it would be worth mentioning that this does not rule Breece Hall out for week 1. That determination, I don't have the exact date in front of me, but last year it was August 23rd was when a guy had to be either removed from that list or he was out the first 4 weeks of the season. So obviously Breece Hall's health is something we'll be monitoring for the next month. And then after that, obviously too, but especially for the next month, and hopefully can get off of that PUP list by then. It's probably not worth talking about the backup options yet. We're still a long ways off, I think, unless of course like Dalvin Cook goes to the Jets, which is at least possible.
Yeah, and I'm not too concerned about him being there. Once roster cutdowns start occurring and they're leaving players on PUP, it is a little more concerning because PUP.
What do you mean? Denzel Mims already getting shown the road today?
No, he's actually not cut. I don't know if you saw the report from Schefter. They decided not to cut him, and they're still actively looking for trade partners.
Well, it's one of those where they're trying to trade him, but if they can't trade him, they're going to cut him, and no one's going to trade for him, so they're going to cut him. But
absolutely. But he hasn't been shown the door yet.
Neither here nor there. Evan Ingram signed a 3-year, $41.25 million deal. We will talk more about Evan Ingram in just a minute on the props, but real quick before we get to that, you've got the subject of the other guys who were franchise tagged and had that Monday 4 p.m. deadline hanging over their heads. Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, all are remaining on the tag. All are playing under the tag this season, or are they? Tony Pollard, it sounds like he is, and it sounds like that was the plan all along from both sides. And which makes sense from Pollard's perspective. This is the first year he'll get to be the true number 1 workhorse guy. You could maybe make himself some money if any running back can still do that at this point. And if he's able to have a good and healthy year this year. But for Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley, Dalton, it is a lot more complicated. There are reports from Ian Rappaport that Saquon turned down 3 pretty legitimate offers from the Giants that would have put him right around the top paid running back as far as guarantees and all that structure goes. We don't have an exact number, so just go look at the Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara contract and just probably ballpark somewhere in there. Don't know about length or anything like that. And then Josh Jacobs, we haven't really heard any details other than both he and Saquon are going to be holding out this summer. We don't know when they're going to be back, and we don't know if it's going to extend into the regular season. I guess, Dalton, kind of your takeaway with all of this, and just vibe check. How concerned are you at this point?
I mean, I'm concerned about both of them at this point. Saquon Barkley, the concern is it sounds like the Giants kind of offered him contracts within an acceptable range, and he was offended by those and decided not to go with it. Mm-hmm. And then Josh Jacobs seemed to have thought that he was getting a contract, according to the reports that he was sitting in his car in the parking lot waiting to go in and sign it. And I mean, both these franchises kind of need these guys if you're looking at a player who did help them win games last year.
The Giants especially, the Raiders, even though Devontae Adams is still there and like Jimmy Garoppolo is allegedly the quarterback, they're kind of at a different point right now where if they just went 2-15, people would say, yeah, that makes sense. But I agree with you. Just we're talking about the team needs these guys. Like both these guys were major engines for their offenses last year and would be again this year if they're on the field.
Yeah. So I'm concerned both of them could hold out. It seems like overall the running backs in the NFL are pretty upset. And I do wonder if whether or not this is going to have some of the NFLPA officials stepping in, make some changes to the guidelines.
Yeah,
I've heard some people float
but what can you change?
Well, I've seen some people float that running backs get a minimum from the NFLPA that adds their salaries per touches. If you listen to Joel Bintoni or the former center, JC Treader, he was on a podcast recently and he said that the NFLPA had already talked about players taking a portion of their salaries allocated to an RB fund. So there have been a lot of like talks around making the RB position, somewhat viable again for players because after their rookie contracts, they are pretty much worthless. So I think that NFLPA has looked at the issue. It's certainly something that's going to be interesting, but I would be concerned about both those players holding out in an attempt to make a point.
So explain to me just real quick, and then we'll get back to this conversation. Explain to me how the money would work with how the amount of touches would then get them a certain amount of money. Like how exactly does that work? The proposed.
Well, as we know, the NFLPA is the union, and every player pays into that union fund. And there's taxes associated with that fund. And what JC Treader said on the podcast, I believe it was the Even Money podcast with what's his name? I don't remember his name. Ross Tucker. And then it would be a segment of their salary would be associated with total rushing touches. And I think they were saying it was like $2,000 per touch or something would result. And then as you go up the line, you get more money. And that was what JC Treader said was one of the NFLPA proposed options for increasing RB pay.
My question that would only help them on their rookie scale deal though, right? Like what incentive would a team have? Like how does that help them get re-signed?
That just promotes more of like a committee then.
Well, a committee
100% does.
Or it could just promote teams to get rid of these guys sooner than they already are. I'm struggling to really see a solution because at the end of the day, the problem isn't that running backs are being blackballed, which I know it's not what you're saying, but like the way that the conversation is kind of going is like you would kind of think that it's like, oh, the position's being blackballed. It's like, no, it just actually the issue is it really doesn't lead to winning, and teams are paying the positions that do lead to winning, and that's just how it goes.
Yeah. The other option I saw floated around is that the franchise tag for wide receiver, tight end, and running back all becomes one, which would then make it a little less profitable to franchise tag these running backs. But obviously, and then it does make it more profitable to sign a first round running back where you at least get some money because that 5th-year option suddenly becomes a little more profitable than franchise tagging a guy.
How about this? How about if you franchise tag a guy, it has to be for 2 years if you do it. And they like balloon the money even more to make it so that teams don't really want to franchise tag a guy. And if you're going to, you pay him more money and you pay him multiple years. Like the franchise tag to me is the biggest con in professional sports.
100%. But yeah, I don't see a way out of this for those guys. It does sound like they might want to hold out.
What's scary is there is no way out. Either they forget about it and go play and try and make the money, or they just hold out, preserve themselves, and try again next year with every team bidding for their services.
Which is going great for Dalvin Cook.
Yeah. So there's not you're just not. There's really no way to know. We're not going to know till we know on any of these things. But obviously, something to keep an eye out with. And then Evan Ingram, we'll jump right into the props with this one. He re-signs with Jacksonville. We've talked a lot about Jacksonville and their offense and their outlook with Calvin Ridley in the fold, Trevor Lawrence, who took a big leap last year, back again this year, obviously, Christian Kirk back as well. So you've got Evan Ingram with his over-under listed at 640.5 receiving yards. It is minus 110 for the over and the under. Dalton, which side are you on for this one?
I'm taking the under, and this is in part the increase in weapons on this team, and that just being Calvin Ridley worries me a little bit about Evan Ingram hitting this over. He's only hit it twice in his career, once last year and then once with the New York Giants, and I think it was by like 2 yards that second time. So I'm not overly excited about seeing him hit it again. And then I know there's not a lot of hype around him, but Britton Strange was a second-round pick, and the tight end room did get a little better behind Evan Ingram in this offense. I don't think it's going to take away significant snaps from him. But when you add Calvin Ridley, you still want to get Christian Kirk his targets. You have a full season of Travis Etienne in this offense. I'm not really seeing like where the yards are going to come from for Evan Ingram. And I think we've said this before. I don't know if he's that good of a player that I'm going to be betting on talent to hit this number, which is a high number for a tight end anyways.
Yep. Johnny, what do you think?
I'm gonna go with the over. I feel like since they give him kind of a big contract, I think it's 3-year, 40-something mil.
Yep.
I feel like if
three for 41.
I feel like they're gonna pay him that much. They want to get him involved in the offense. I know Kevin Ridley's there, but I think he had a great year last year, like a prove-it year, and I think he's just gonna continue the momentum. Trevor Lawrence is gonna ball out more and throw for a ton of yards, and I think he's gonna hit the over.
We do know about Doug Peterson's history with getting tight ends involved too. So there's definitely an argument both ways. I'm going to side with Dalton, though, and take the under on this one as well. I think, he's a great mismatch guy in this offense. You've got Ridley, you've got Kirk, and then you can have Ingram work against advantageous coverages. I think he's going to be really good for fantasy, probably about as much so as last year. But I think we could see less volume and fewer yards. And you mentioned Dalton, he barely hit this number last year, and more touchdowns. He only had 4 receiving touchdowns last year. There's definitely positive regression potential. So he could see overall volume go down, but then fantasy-wise be in a similar ballpark. And he did play all 17 last year and barely hit this number. So you've got potential for worse health. You have Calvin Ridley, and you've got him projected for, I think, right around his ceiling. So I just think the under is probably the more likely of these two.
Yeah, I agree. And who knows? Britton Strange? Are we getting strange this year?
I'm not feeling too strange yet, but that's up to you. All right, Bryce Young, over under 3,400.5 passing yards, the number 1 overall pick. Minus 115 for the over and the under. I'll start first on this one. I'm taking the over for Bryce Young here. 16 rookie quarterbacks have hit this number in the last, I think it was like last 18 years, or maybe it was all time. Now I'm forgetting. But most of them were in the last 20 years, obviously with more passing. Baker Mayfield, Brandon Weeden, Sam Bradford were guys on that list. So Bryce Young doesn't have to be a great player to hit this number as a rookie. He may have one of the worst receiving groups in the NFL, Dalton. You might be talking about that later. So that will definitely hurt. But I just think that Frank Reich is going to maximize this group. He's got a good offensive line. You at least feel okay about Miles Sanders as his running back. And I do like Bryce Young a lot. And even though he may have a bit of an adjustment period and he can't hold the ball as long and try and play hero ball as much in the NFL, I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he's a very polished passer that can kind of translate right away. I think that 3,800 to 4,000 range is a realistic one for him.
That would put him top 6 in all time.
Well, he was number 1 pick, so it would be reasonable.
I mean, Josh Rosen was number 1 pick.
He was not the number 1.
Oh, you're correct.
No.
If you can't tell, I am taking the under on this one. I think 3,400 is a lot of yards. I mean, you even mentioned Baker Mayfield, but Baker Mayfield's rookie season was actually like pretty impressive behind a very good offensive line. But I think with the weapons he has in this offense, a lot of the work is going to result in him doing it by himself. I also think he's underrated with his mobility, and he might have more scrambling than other guys. And then I think Frank Reich is a pretty big fan of a balanced attack. If you look back at his Indianapolis Colts teams, they ran on a 60-40 split, which would have been under the NFL passing average. So I think all in all, this team's going to be balanced. They're probably going to be an all right team that comes out to play, but I don't think that they're going to be throwing it enough for him to hit that passing over, and no one's going to help him get there on that team.
He only has to average 200 yards per game. Johnny, what do you think?
I'm going to go with the under because the Panthers stink.
Are we sure? Are we sure about that? You sure about that? I had to get that drop made for this podcast.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah. I'm gonna go with the under.
That's a real slop if I've ever heard slop.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. Panthers might just make the playoffs out of that division.
Well, that's not saying a lot.
I know
that division
stinks. Not. It's not. He gets to play that division 6 times this year, so that helps. All right. Tony Pollard, who we talked about earlier, his over-under 1,050.5 rushing yards, plus 100 on the over, minus 120 on the under. Vegas is fading Tony Pollard. Dalton, are you?
No, I'm not. First of all, I was surprised.
Knew it.
That he didn't hit this last year. I thought he would have. He didn't. But he hit 1,009 yards in a backup role last season in a lot of games where he didn't receive more than 10 carries. 193 total was his carries for the season. When you look behind him on the depth chart, I don't think anybody's going to challenge him to hold the ball. He's explosive. He's behind a good offensive line.
I mean, they're signing someone else, right? Like Zeke is
back. I would expect them, but they haven't yet, and we are now into training camp season. And then, I mean, just with what Mike McCarthy and Co are saying, it does seem like they want to run the ball more, and that's still a top 5 offensive line. Now we'll see if Zach Martin holds out and what that does in the future. But I certainly think that him hitting this over is not something I'd be too worried about. I would like this line.
Zach Martin's a guy who he's going to hold out, and he's probably going to get exactly what he wants. Unlike the running backs who are trying the same. Obviously, they can't get it anyway now, but who didn't get it at the time. I'm taking the under. You mentioned it. He was a very slight under in 16 games played last year. I know Zeke was there, and he was the starter. And Pollard got more carries after the first 4 weeks last year. But I just think this, kind of like with Evan Ingram, is fairly close to his ceiling. You project, at least I do with most running backs, especially when you do these lines, you project it 14, 15 games. You project them to miss a little bit of time. And I just think there's been a lot of talk from Dallas that they've always liked limiting him to a certain amount of snaps. And I guess and snaps has really been the key thing. I'll be curious what his touches are like this year. But I really am not sure he's going to get markedly more volume than he did last year. I mean, he'll get more, maybe 20 carries more if he's healthy the whole season. But I don't know. I just, in my opinion,
or would get him there.
It would if he's healthy every game. I'm betting on 14, 15 games and pretty similar volume. I think this is a slight under, but it's close. Like me personally, I wouldn't bet this.
Yeah, I think part of it, when I just looked at it, he was 24th in the NFL last year in rush attempts. He had less than Jonathan Taylor, which was interesting because Jonathan Taylor played 11 games. Mm-hmm. So I just think there's
Jonathan Taylor is a guy that when he plays gets 20 plus carries every game, and I don't think Pollard should be that if they want to keep him healthy. And like I said, I do think Zeke will be back eventually. Johnny, what do you think?
I like the over. I mean, just every single time he touched the ball, it just felt like he was just going to break loose at 20, 30 yards. But every single time I watched him touch the ball, it was insane. But I think with Zeke not being there to start for right now, I think he's going to be a lead dog. And I think he's going to get the touches to hit the over here.
Well, if what the Cowboys are saying about running the ball is true, he might. But I think me personally, I'm taking that storyline and chalking that up to teams just talking. I'll believe that when I see it. But all right, Joe Mixon. So he talking about guys with news recently. I think since we last potted, he took a pay cut of about $4 million over the next 2 years. He is going to be in Cincy at least this year, probably next year at that number. His over-under is 825.5 on the rushing yards. He has minus 110 both ways. And I am taking the over on this one. And I like this line quite a bit. He may not be quite the same guy that he was 2 years ago, but he almost hit that number in 14 games last season. You can expect a similar number of games this season. And remember how much that offense was struggling running the ball early in the season and just with their identity and running the ball and not telegraphing when they were going to run the ball early in the year last year. We talked about that plenty in the first month of last season. I think Orlando Brown's going to help their run game as a power blocker. And, I think if Mixon plays 14 to 15 games, he's going to be closer to 1,000 yards than he is this number. And honestly, like I could see the receptions taking a little bit of a step back. He was a career high 75 targets and also a career high in receptions last year.
Yeah, I do think after looking at this, I'm taking Mixon down in my ranks from RB11. I am taking the over because I think the number is small enough that it's not going to be overly difficult for him to hit it. But it is pretty startling that on 210 attempts last year, he didn't hit this. And then Tony Pollard cleared this by 200 on 17 less carries.
Yep.
So I'm taking the over. I don't feel comfortable about it. It's good to know that he's playing. I think that the offense is probably going to rely on him a little more without Samaje Perine. Behind him are a bunch of players, Travion Williams and Chase Brown.
I still really think they should sign a backup running back, but I don't know if they're going to. So that definitely helps if they don't.
Yes. And with all of that said, I mean, you're taking the over because I think the volume is going to be there and he just has to rip off a couple of runs. But it does look like, especially a lot of his advanced like rushing efficiency numbers, I think he is starting to get worse. And his age is definitely hitting him.
Yep, I talked about that but a couple weeks ago, but I do like this number. Johnny, what do you think?
Yeah, I like the number 2. It felt a little baity by Vegas to have it at 825, but I like the over here, so I'm sure Vegas won't win here.
Yeah, well, this is the first one we all agree on today, so this will probably be an under. All right, last one, and then we can go to the training camp storylines. Amon-Ra St. Brown, speaking of baity, over under 999.5 receiving yards. He cleared this by about 160 last season, and he even missed the game and played a couple games a little bit banged up early in the season as well. Minus 120 on the over, plus 100 on the under. So they're thinking he's going to hit it, but minus 120 is still not bad. Dalton, what do you think about this number?
This is bait, right? Like I saw this and I thought you were wrong, and I looked it up. I'm taking the over. Obviously, they've done nothing to add playmakers to this offense. They're waiting for Jameson Williams to return. But even then, for the first half of the season, TJ Hawkinson was competing for targets with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who makes his work over the middle.
I was going to say, and competing with him in the same space, whereas Jameson will not be. If Jameson comes back, like the theoretical Jameson Williams that lives in our mind fits very well with Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yes, it's like Schrodinger's cat, but it's Jameson Williams plays football. But yeah, so I'm taking the over. I mean, he could very likely compete to lead the NFL in targets. He would have done it last season had he been healthy all season. Yeah. So I just don't know how you get this number so low. This is one that I'm probably going to bet with my own real money and would advise others to do.
Yeah, if we know one thing about Jared Goff is that he will throw it in the short and intermediate area when that guy is open. And Amon-Ra St. Brown occupies that area, and he is often open. So I like this number. I like the over. You said it. Even when Jameson comes back, I think the field stretching, while it could take away a little bit of volume, could help him be more efficient. So it might be a wash. We don't really know, but I'll anticipate that being a problem for him down the stretch. I like this number a lot too. I don't remember. I may have actually bet this before the podcast this week, but I'm pretty in on this.
There's no way this backfires, right? I like the over as well. He just looked so good last year as a rookie, and
second year he was 2 years ago as a rookie, but he almost hit this number as a rookie. He almost hit this number as a rookie too.
Just Goff. I think one game he had like 18 targets, so it's like it's his guy. So like I think the targets are going to be there this year, and I'm pretty confident the over will hit here.
Yeah. So looking forward to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Joe Mixon just cratering this year. Love that. Love that for us. All right, Dalton, let's get into the training camp storylines on that note. Like I said, Dalton's got NFC. I've got AFC. Do you want to have one of us go through all of our storylines and then go to the other? Or do you want to alternate? How do you want to format this?
I think we just go east to west.
I don't really know what east to west means in this.
We start in the east, then we go south, north, west.
You're really making me think a lot more about John. This would be easier if this were more like the NBA, where teams were at least somewhat like like the Giants are in the AFC and so are the Jets. Like, you're gonna really make me try and like differentiate those.
Well, the Giants are in the NFC, but yes.
That's why I said Giants are in the NFC and Jets in the AFC.
Oh, yes. So we'll start in the East, which would be the NFC East.
Sure. If you have the NFC East one, go for it, because I don't know.
Well, I went with the Washington football team as the team I'm watching, and the storyline to watch is what running back emerges from this team.
They really want it to be Brian Robinson still.
They really wanted to be Brian Robinson, which you're correct. They were the second run heaviest team in the NFL last year. And Brian Robinson, the game they won against the Eagles, I think he had 26 carries and 80 yards, which is not very efficient. From an underlying efficiency perspective, we'll start off with Brian Robinson because he has the second highest ADP on Underdog. He was 28th out of 45 qualified running backs in rush efficiency, but then he was 42nd out of 52 qualifying running backs in forced missed tackle rate. He also had the 16th lowest third down percentage of any running back who qualified that had at least 150 snaps. So not good from the play on third down. He's not going to be a guy catching passes. And then his ADP right now on Underdog is RB 37. Antonio Gibson is ahead of him at RB 32. And then you have Chris Rodriguez at RB 90. So you can really get any of these guys for free however you want. I'm going to watch who's coming out of this battle. There's already been some murmurs that Antonio Gibson is going to play wide receiver. I don't know how we're
Which, like, you have Jahan Dotson, you have Terry McLaurin, you have Curtis Samuel. Like, are you playing him over Curtis Samuel? Probably not. Like, I don't know. The Antonio Gibson arc has been just one of the strangest. And I was hoping that with Bieniemy there, that maybe he would just kind of shove Ron Rivera out the door and take a little bit more control of that running back room. And maybe he is, and he just loves Brian Robinson too, because Robinson is kind of fits in that Jamal Williams mold of coaches love this guy because he's a grinder. He does what they ask. He's going to get the yards that are blocked, run between the tackles well, all that. I mean, this is a guy that led the NFC in rushing attempts in the final 5 games of the regular season last year. And I've got a tweet from somebody. His name's Ray G. I don't know his full name, but he's a fantasy guy. He tweeted, Brian Robinson is the bell cow RB absolutely nobody wants, but Washington is hell-bent on giving us. And that is kind of the give and take that we're going to be watching over this next month.
Yeah. I don't think Brian Robinson's bad. I don't think he's great, at least from what he did last offseason. I think Eric Bieniemy brings a very interesting part to this offense and could make it a little more efficient. And then Ron Rivera has been a coach who's always wanted to run 2 running backs out there. So I'm waiting to see who solidifies themselves in that second role, because for whatever reason, like you said, it looks like Antonio Gibson isn't going to be there. If it is Chris Rodriguez, there have been linked to Kareem Hunt for the Washington football team. If either of those guys come in there, I'm probably taking them before Brad Robinson, especially in PPR and half PPR leagues, because I don't think that he's going to be a great pass catcher. He hasn't really shown that. He didn't show that in college. So all in all, like, the storyline for me to watch here is who emerges in that RB2 role. And then I'm probably going to target them or watch week 1, and they'll probably be a waiver wire favorite of mine.
So the RB2 role, like on this team, you mean?
Yes.
So you're already cementing Brian Robinson as the RB1.
Yeah, I don't really see a world where he's not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like they really want him to be that role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll start with my team furthest on the East, because that is what we're doing here apparently, and that is the Buffalo Bills, and that is Dalton Kincaid. We care about this guy a lot, and that is because he was a great college football prospect, a great pass catcher, and he's gone to one of the best 5 offenses in the NFL and one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. For people who aren't as familiar with the prospect profile here, his last 2 years in college, he was 1,400 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns in those 2 years, which in college, he's playing less games. That's a lot of yards and touchdowns, especially for a tight end. in college. Last year, he had the game against USC that we've referenced often. 16 receptions, 234 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 massive win for Utah in that game. And, Matt Waldman talked about this recently on his podcast, and I thought it was interesting that when the Bills first drafted him, they talked a lot about him as this dynamic weapon who can move all around and cause matchup problems. Then they kind of eased off of that a little bit and put out some messaging basically saying we don't really know how we're going to use him yet. We're still figuring that out, kind of trying to tamper down the hype a little bit. Maybe a little bit afraid that we could have a James Cook 2.0 where they say all these things and then that guy is just not that guy and they look a little bit dumb and it makes the player look bad when he doesn't live up to that. But now that he's been in the building for longer, he's been building chemistry with Josh Allen a little bit more. They're kind of moving back to that talking point of this guy's a matchup problem. He's going to be, basically they're between the lines telling us he's going to be on the field, going to be a matchup problem. And I think, Waldman said this, and I agree that reading between the lines, just this kind of seems like he's been everything that they hoped for so far. And I'm just really interested to see how they talk about him and how they talk about the other weapons around him. Diggs in a tier of his own, assuming he's there. And then you have all those other guys. Like, what's the Gabe Davis conversation like heading into this year after a disappointing year last year? Are they talking about playing 2 tight ends with Dawson Knox a lot, which if they are, that's great for both guys, but especially for Kincaid, because that means he has that slot role probably locked down that everybody is kind of projecting him for right now. I mean, the expectation for him around the team is pretty sky high right now. I mean, I read a Bills beat writer yesterday who projected him to break their franchise record receiving yards for a tight end in year 1. Not like as a rookie, but it's the franchise record. But for him to do that in year 1, it's 726. So it's not like that crazy. And he could definitely do that. But obviously you're looking for anything negative to come out. That always tells you a lot. And I really just want to see how Dawson Knox is talked a lot about too. Is there a lot of, Dawson Knox might kind of be the tight end 1 early in the season, or do we get fed more of the 2 tight end thing? And Knox as maybe more of a blocker. I think there's a lot of interesting subplots that feed into the Kincaid thing as a whole for the Bills.
Well, another one is he didn't practice for the combine. He didn't run any of the combine because of lower body soft tissue injuries. And I think it was a back injury. He had a back injury in college. Yeah. And as we know, those things can kind of follow through. So if he's showing up and practicing right away, that's going to be encouraging as well. But yeah, if he's running with the 1s or if he's running with the 2s, what he's doing at practice, I think those are all important. And then whether or not they're even putting him in blocking drills, I think if he shows up and he's not even running any blocking drills, he's running with the wide receiver unit, you really know that like the hype around him and what they're saying is what he's going to be doing. Because I would be surprised if they sent this guy out there.
His ADP, if that happens, if we get news like Dalton Kincaid not even working on blocking, not even a thought as a blocker for the Bills, his ADP is going to go up, up, up if that happens.
Yes.
And but I'm not even saying it's necessarily correct to skyrocket that much off of that, but that's what's going to happen.
But this could very much be they need a wide receiver 2, and he could be their wide receiver 2 situation.
Yeah, and I think like it's that for sure, and it's also he has the ability to do it too. It's not just a Gabe Davis. Well, he's the best of the rest. Like no, like he legitimately can be a matchup problem at like 6'4", 240 pounds. I think is what he is, somewhere in that range, and quick, good route runner. High point the ball, all that stuff. I'm not going to go like with the baby Kelsey like some people are going with, but he's at least in that mold as a tight end, closer to that type of player than like a George Kittle where he's more of a blocker. So, yeah, he'll be an interesting one to follow. What's your second NFC storyline?
We're staying in the NFC South and a team that you loved earlier, and we are going with the Panthers. So right now, the Panthers ADP on Underdog, Adam Thielen is wide receiver 64. Jonathan Mingo is wide receiver 63. DJ Chark.
He's got a family. He's relocated. I'm starting to add personal details to this.
I just every time we mention Chark, I have to do that. All right, say what Chark's ADP was. I cut you off with that.
He's 68. Terrace Marshall is 87, and I could not find one for LaVisca Chenault, so it's out of the hundreds. Unfortunately, they killed our boy. If you look, last year only one team didn't have a wide receiver who would have beat this ADP.
He's wide receiver 108 on Fantasy Pros.
That's disgusting. So the Bears last year would have been the only team in the NFL to not have one player on their team beat any of these ADPs. And Darnell Mooney was wide receiver 75 despite missing 8 games. So even the Bears would have had a player hit this. So there's going to be value somewhere on this team. Somebody is going to hit above their ADP, and they're probably going to hit relatively big. Like one of these guys could hit the 50s or even like into the low 40s and still be like a good wide receiver 4 that you're getting in round 16 or 17 of your fantasy drafts. So I'm going to be watching that battle. You know, it starts at the top. Is Jonathan Mingo even getting to run with the ones? How are they utilizing him? Who's playing what? There's not a player on this team who solidifies themselves as a slot player. I wouldn't look because I thought maybe at age, Adam Thielen would be well at that. But with the Minnesota Vikings, this is from ESPN Stats and Statistics, he played 12% of the slot snaps over the course of his career. So
really, I was gonna say I wouldn't be shocked just based off last year because Jefferson moves around and then Osborne is strictly slot. But for his career, I mean, there's been digs. There's been other times where he could have been the slot more.
Yeah. So unless he makes a change in how his role is played, he's not going to have that role, and that's going to be a really valuable one. Terrace Marshall, fun stat: he was top 10 in the NFL last year in points per target. He had 55 targets, so there's a reason for that. It is very low threshold to get him in there, but he's a guy who's definitely had some exciting nights. I can think of the Thursday night football game last year where he looked better. Jonathan Mingo is exciting, and then DJ Chark with the Lions last year had a few productive games. So I want to see what the camp storyline coming out of this is. I know it's not fun to read the beat reports because they hype everybody up, but you can't hype all 5 wide receivers up on this team. And as you can tell with their ADPs being so close, it's a grab bag already. So whoever the beat reporters are talking the most like graciously about is probably the guy that I'll be willing to take late in my rounds going into week 1 to see how they utilize them on the field.
I mean, what's going to happen is we're going to get the Adam Thielen and Bryce Young have a great connection because it would make sense because Adam Thielen of those guys is probably maybe not at this point the best route runner of those guys because he's probably lost a step, but the most refined of those guys, probably the smartest player.
The most consistent.
So I think you're probably going to see a lot of that. Now, how excited will I be about that? I don't know. I think obviously the storyline that would excite me and everybody the most is if Mingo is really blowing people away and he looks good and is a legitimate guy that they can't keep off the field in training camp.
I think that would be the most exciting. But again, 4 years ago, DJ Chark had a top 12 season with Gardner Minshew. So it's there. And then
it is. We've had a lot of guys have had top 12 seasons since DJ Chark has had one.
LaVisca Chenault still around.
He is. He's lurking. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's doing, but he's lurking. He's there.
Yeah, but I want to see who comes out of this, and then I want to see who's playing what positions because they don't really have a good slot player right now.
Mm-hmm. So from one rookie quarterback's team to another in the Colts and Anthony Richardson for me, I think Richardson is outside of following the injury stuff, which I decide not to go down that route. Obviously, you've got Breece Hall, you've got Javonte Williams, you've got all those kind of guys. We all know that. Outside of following that stuff and the holdout stuff, I think Anthony Richardson might be one of the most important storylines heading into training camp and ahead of this season. Because, number one, just he himself, if he does impress enough to be the week 1 starter, which I don't know if you guys heard Jim Irsay talk the other day, it doesn't sound like a guarantee. It was kind of like Gardner can play, he can start. Obviously, they're going to play Richardson this year. That was very clear, but he kind of snuck in it's a coach's decision when it happens at the end. So a little unclear right now if Richardson is going to be the week 1 starter or not. And obviously, if he's not, that has to effect where I have him ranked, where you have him ranked, because we're both fairly bullish. Top, I think I have him 16. You might have him around there, maybe a little bit higher. So that's first and foremost, is he playing well enough to earn the week 1 starting job? But then if he is the week 1 starter, or even if he's, the week 4 starter or whatever, how is the passing coming along? Is the passing going to be a problem this year? Or is he grasping the playbook? Are they able to throw more at him? Does he have a good connection with those receivers? Because they have a lot of guys that we care about on this team. Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, like even Josh Downs is a nice sleeper slot receiver at the end of drafts this year, if the situation is right. And then you look at the running back opposite, Jonathan Taylor is a first-round pick, at worst an early second-round pick in your draft, I would think. So I just think there are a lot of guys that Richardson needs to be able to sustain. And I'm going to be watching, like I'm probably going to be, and I don't do this very often, but I'm going to be living and dying with every report on him every day. How does the passing look? I don't necessarily need to hear like the stats from training camp, but I just want to hear that everything is going smoothly and that he's picking up the passing well, because, we know that we both thought here that the completion percentage concerns were overblown, but at the same time, it's not like we expect him to transition seamlessly as a passer. So how good can the passing be year 1 for Richardson is a big deal. And it's a big deal to get him on the field as early as possible too. Pull this stat from the Fantasy Footballers. Over the last 20 years, every rookie quarterback with 80 or more total rushing attempts was a top 10 fantasy quarterback in points per game. So you get him on the field, he runs as much as we think he probably will. He has a great chance. History tells us 100% chance in the last 20 years of outperforming even where we have him ranked. So I think this is a big time swing player for his own rank, but then also all of these other guys on this offense.
Yeah, and that's barely 5 rushes a game, which isn't hard to get to when you just add scrambles in. I think it is huge. I do think like a bit of what Jim Irsay said is a little bit of GM speak and covering his own, but it looks like Shane Steichen wants to start Anthony Richardson out the gate. He is probably more fitting to the offense Steichen ran in Philly. Not to say that Jalen Hurts and Richardson are the same player or that Richardson's as good as Jalen Hurts, but he's definitely a much better rushing quarterback than Gardner Minshew.
Yes.
And it just really, I understand that you have to watch camp storylines to see if he's going to be playing it. It's very important. But from like a organizational perspective, it makes no sense not to put the guy out there and see what you got.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then if he's hitting like those short intermediate passes we didn't get to see at Florida, that would be incredibly exciting and profitable for his value.
Like the first time we get he's really seeing the field well today. He made all the reads. That'll be a big time fist bump for me when I see that alert come through.
Yeah, so definitely huge. And then it'll be exciting to see what they're talking about, what kind of offense they're running. Is it RPO heavy? Because Jonathan Taylor looks like a screaming value if they're doing that. And RPOs are big on first look receivers. If that's Michael Pittman, he could be a profitable. He's like wide receiver 33 right now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it all hinges on Richardson. And then if it's Gardner Minshew, all those wide receivers probably get a bump because people expect more passing.
Yep. Very fair. All right, who's your third?
We are going to the fun NFC North and the Green Bay Packers, and the guy that all the eyes are on in Jordan Love. This is a player that I think camp reports are going to be incredibly important for. There's nobody on this roster who's going to play above him. I don't even know who their quarterback 2 is. I didn't look it up for this because I don't think that they'll be playing. But Jordan Love got his 5th-year option declined and signed a 5th-year option for less money, which means one of 2 things. The Packers think he sucks, and Jordan Love thinks he sucks because he took the contract for less and didn't sign somewhere else in the most QB-friendly market we could find, or that he thinks he's good enough that he can win it on a prove-it deal. This is a player who spent 4 years in this offensive system on this team, and if the camp reports are he's missing reads, he's not appropriately sliding protections, very simple things, I'm going to be really worried for Jordan Love. And then you look at the ADPs of guys around him. Christian Watson's all the way up to wide receiver 21.
Wow.
And if if Jordan Love can't handle an offense effectively, he's going to tank Christian Watson's value, who was propped up on a very high TD rate, which you can have with an MVP caliber quarterback like Aaron Rodgers.
Well, and Jordan Love was the number one reason why Aaron Jones was on my guys I'm afraid I'm wrong about segment last week.
And then this one scratches my head. Romeo Doubs is going as wide receiver 55 right now. He finished the season, granted 13 games, as wide receiver 72. His points per game puts him at wide receiver 61. He loses Aaron Rodgers, and he is now going higher in drafts. And then they drafted Jaden Reed, who's going wide receiver 70.
We're getting some positive Romeo Doubs buzz early in offseason stuff these last couple of weeks, so maybe that's contributing to it.
Yeah. But I think it's critically important that we read what these beat reporters are saying. These are guys also who spent probably the majority of their career, 20 years, watching Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. So they know what good quarterback play looks like at training camp. And if they're berating Jordan Love in their reports, and we've seen what he is on the NFL field, which isn't very good, it's going to lead to a lot of confirmation bias. And I'm probably going to fade every Packer at cost, except for maybe A.J. Dillon at that point.
Well, and I'm also curious what the word is on their offense, just as a whole, coming out of camp. As far as, last year, it was a lot of, these two running backs are our two best players besides Aaron Rodgers on offense, so we got to get them the ball any way possible. And that didn't really materialize, and that obviously was a big-time red flag in retrospect, and we even knew at the time, too, telling us that the receivers were bad. So I'll be curious to see how the Packers try and morph this offense around Jordan Love, what kind of language we hear about all of that and how he's picking up the playbook. It should be well, because like you said, he's been there for 4 years, but it's a different deal being there and being the guy actually doing it every day, obviously.
Yeah. So I'll be really interested how that goes, and it's probably going to go poorly.
Hopefully not, for the sake of a lot of guys there, but there's at least a very strong chance. From a situation that could go poorly to one that I think will go well almost no matter what, barring injury, but we just have to find out who it's going to go well for. And that is the Chiefs, and that is their wide receiver room. It's kind of like last year, but to an even bigger extent, that this training camp is really, again, going to be about trying to find the right guy and the right values in this receiver room, because Patrick Mahomes doesn't have a receiver in the top, I believe, 36 of ADP, and it may be even slightly lower than that. I don't know where Tony is at this exact moment, but you have Tony, you have MVS, you have Sky Moore. It's going to be probably one of those three guys. I think we got a little bit of a positive report on Rashee Rice to end practice today. They caught a touchdown, looked great doing it, blah, blah, blah. It was from the backup quarterback, so you can take that for what's will and for what it is. And also, it sounds like he is not quite in NFL shape. Reed had a quote about it last month, and he was nauseous and throwing up at practice today. And Reed basically said last month, we run those guys hard. He's got to get in shape, and he's not quite there yet. So you would expect Rice is probably a candidate for the Andy Reid redshirt year at receiver. So of these three guys, I don't think there's much we could really hear that's going to change my opinion on MVS about MVS. Now, if we start hearing very negative things about Tony and or Sky Moore, then that would probably lead me to raise MVS a little bit in the ranks. But we haven't heard that yet, so I don't think we're going to. I mean, the number one thing that everybody's watching here is Kadarius Toney. How is he lining up? Is he being treated like a pure number one? Or is he running the big boy stuff, the number one receiver stuff? Is he doing that and also lining up in the backfield, taking jet sweeps, doing all of the kind of McCole Hardman and then obviously the Tyreek Hill type of stuff in this offense too? Or is Sky Moore
practicing?
Yeah, is he healthy? That's obviously a big one too. I'd also would prefer if he would just kind of chill out with the Giants fans, stop being so much Kadarius Toney and just kind of chill. I'd prefer that to be a storyline that goes away as well. And then obviously, just does he have a full grasp of the playbook? I think that was a big reason why the snaps were low and expectedly so at the end of last season was because the playbook, it just takes time. So how is that transition going for him? And basically, can he be a number one instead of a gadget guy? That's the number one thing I'm looking at. And then to a lesser extent, I want to hear exactly what we've heard so far about Sky Moore. Like we've heard the slot targets are vacated. There's like 1,900 yards the Chiefs gained in the slot last year. Juju was a big reason for that. The Chiefs, I believe, are number 2 in the NFL in most receiver targets lost at 135 per ESPN. So there is volume for both these guys, and especially for Sky on the inside to be had. And so far, the reports from the team and from beat writers have been good on Sky Moore. So I just want to continue to see that stuff, frankly. And I think that if we keep getting a drumbeat that is positive like this for Sky, and this is not going to be a knock on Tony, but I could easily see myself elevating Sky closer to Tony, and I already have him closer than most people do.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I agree with you in part because the slot position is going to be really helpful on this team. Obviously, this team sees a lot of zones because of the offense they run. And obviously, 2 years ago, they needed a zone beater. Juju did that last year, and Juju was wide receiver 27, despite not missing any games, but playing significantly less.
Well, he missed a couple games. He had the concussion. I think he missed a week or two.
I'm looking at his game log. He had a percent of snaps in every game.
Well, he got concussion on the first drive of the Jacksonville game. So maybe it was
his lowest snap percentage was 38% the Jacksonville game. Then we had you're right. He missed the Chargers game. Sorry. Okay. And then he played 38% against the Rams.
So he missed almost the whole game, then missed the game, and then got severely eased back into his first game back. So you could kind of ballpark that at about a game and a half, 2 games missed, give or take. So he missed a couple games and was still top 30. And he also was being slowed down by a knee injury to end the season.
Correct. So any of these guys getting that role full time is immediately going to beat ADP. I mean, like you said, Tony's the highest. I think Sky Moore's in the 50s right now on Underdog. So he's certainly a screaming value at that. This Andy Reid playbook takes time to learn. We've learned that with every player who's come into it. I still have concerns about Sky Moore, mostly because there were a few times last year he just ran the wrong route, which you never like to see. But then the concerns with Kadarius Toney are equal in that he can't stay on the field and that he's definitely a problem off the field when it comes to his personality. I don't think Rashee Rice is it either because it does take a year to get there. But out of everybody, I think the best value in fantasy football right now is definitely Sky Moore because it looks like he might have won that slot role.
Yeah, well, and if we start getting some Richie James hype or something like that, I might kind of raise my eyebrow and be like, okay, I wonder what that means, how they're feeling about the other guys there. But yeah, obviously we all know how valuable that Chiefs situation is, and those 2 guys, they didn't get Hopkins, so it seems like it's going to be those 2 guys are going to be trusted as the 2 and the 3 behind Kelsey at the 1. Obviously, Dalton, who's your 4th team?
We are heading out to the NFC West, and it's looking at the running back fight for RB1 in Seattle between Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I know we've written it up as Ken Walker's role, and I think that it's pretty safe to assume he's the 1A right now, but I want to see the beat camp reports on Zach Charbonnet. Like we've said,
you got to try and decode Pete Carroll talk for about the 12th year in a row unsuccessfully.
Well, before Russell Wilson, that was the problem. You just got it's addition by subtraction right now. And Ken Walker last year, for what it's worth, was not a consistent running back. And I think that's something that Pete Carroll really values in his offense. Chris Carson for multiple years. And before that, Marshawn Lynch, different calibers of players, but both of them are very consistent in what they did. But if you look at the numbers for Ken Walker, he had a 32% rushing success rate inside the tackles. That's not great. Zach Charbonnet's final season at UCLA, he ran almost exclusively between the tackles, and he was top 4 in the nation in yards gained. So he's a guy who does the small things right. He's a very good pass blocker, which Ken Walker last year ranked 44 out of 48 qualifying running backs in pass block rate. Not something you want to see. And then Ken Walker had 100% of his team snaps within the 5, but he still only turned that into 3 touchdowns. Those are things that you want to do better as a running back, and Ken Walker certainly has the ability to improve on them. One area I think Charbonnet has a beat right now is receiving, which is going to hurt the bottom line of Ken Walker. But I want to see what the reporters are saying out of camp. What do they think of Charbonnet? Has he picked up the playbook? Is he playing well? Is he establishing himself? And if those things are happening, I'm probably going to dock Ken Walker a little more because I think he's a very boom or bust back. And those busts can lead to less playing time for him if he's playing poorly in a game. And Charbonnet can come in and just get them the 4 yards they want, but he may not be the guy who's going to hit an 80-yard run for them.
Well, what's scary is everything that Charbonnet is good at that you outlined. That's kind of everything that Pete Carroll likes his running backs to be good at, just like based on the Chris Carson mold. Obviously, Marshawn Lynch, kind of a different beast, no pun intended with the nickname there. But with Chris Carson, you loved him so much because he could be between the tackles guy and be reliable in all of those areas. So, yeah, that makes you worry for Walker and interested in how Charbonnet is being talked about by beat writers and by coaches not named Pete Carroll over there as well. Like, it's funny. We've kind of said that Charbonnet is just better Brian Robinson. I don't want to make the Kenneth Walker, Antonio Gibson comp. I think Walker's better, but like it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson to this backfield a little bit, and he became the 60 to the 40. I think Walker is too good. I don't think that should happen, but that doesn't mean it won't, because I'm oftentimes, at least a lot of times, not correct about the workload of guys. So it's a scary situation and definitely one to watch from a Walker perspective. And for Charbonnet, it's house money.
Yeah, absolutely. And their ADPs right now are RB 16 for Ken Walker and then RB 33 for Charbonnet. So Charbonnet is definitely a much freer value. And if he gets the goal line work or something, he's going to be a smash, because I think I would already pencil him in for a good receiving role, especially with the departure of Travis Homer and DJ Dallas.
Mm-hmm. All right, my fourth and final one. Before I get to it, I'll just mention a couple of, I'll say, honorable mentions, because we've talked about it a lot, or are going to keep talking about it. I think I didn't want to beat the dead horse too much with these, but Ravens, who's going to be the wide receiver one? Is it going to be Bateman? Can he stay healthy? How's Zay Flowers look? How does Odell look? I think that is the storylines with them. The Browns, we all know it's Deshaun Watson. We're all watching that. We don't need to talk about that one anymore. And then the Jaguars, Calvin Ridley, like, we're all interested in that. Trevor Lawrence said he is awesome pretty much today. So we're all following that. We all know that. I went back to the AFC West for my last one with the Chargers. And really, it's how does or doesn't Kellen Moore transform this offense? And I think the answer is he's probably going to. You look at the Cowboys' pace of play since 2019, they were third, second, first, and fourth. Their points per game in that stretch are sixth, second, 13th, and first. And then I think the year they were second, that was a Dak injured year. So those were only from Dak games in that standing. That's per Fantasy Footballers. Also, Dak's ADOT above 8 all of those years. And Herbert has never been above 9. Sorry, Herbert's been above 8 twice, down to 6.9 last year. Dak has been close to 9 twice, 8.7, 8.5, and then above 9 multiple times as well. We should see a more up-tempo and aggressive offense with Kellen Moore calling the plays. And then you think about who the quarterback is. Per Warren Sharp, Herbert, on his downfield throws, 30 yards or more, of quarterbacks with 30 or more attempts, first in accuracy, second in EPA per attempt, third in success rate, completion rate, and touchdown rate, and fourth in yards per attempt. So I just really want to hear reports on what this offense looks like. Are there big plays being dialed up? Is it going to look more like a big play offense? Who outside of Mike Williams is the big play guy that we're looking at down the field? Because, like, are we going to be in a situation where if Mike Williams isn't out there, which he a lot of times isn't, are they going to have to revert back? Or is Quentin Johnston going to be ready enough that he can contribute and be a downfield threat in those areas? He has the profile to be, but we know that the contested catch stuff isn't great. He has to just straight up beat you on those routes to really do that in the NFL. And then just from a running game perspective, this was the second most unbalanced team in the NFL last year with a 65-35 run-pass split. How does a more balanced approach, which is what they're saying they want to do, how does that transform Eckler's role? Is it for the better? Is it for the worse? I would probably side on worse. And I'm also looking at, is there a second running back who can be a grinder on this team between the tackles that emerges? I think there's a lot up in the air and a lot of interesting things to follow with this offense and a ton of value to be had on this offense, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, Kellen Moore led the NFL 2 years in a row in plays per game. And obviously, the more plays an offense has, the more likely they are to score fantasy points. But in addition to that, Mike Williams, again, they haven't reported camp yet, so we don't know yet, but he did break his back to end the season. Being a little hyperbolic with that, but he literally didn't play in a playoff game because they let him play in a useless Week 17 game.
That they also lost.
Yes. And if he's not healthy, it's a big jump to say Quentin Johnson's going to replace him. Then again, you have Keenan Allen, who's entering his age 33, 32 season.
It's early 30s at least.
Yeah, he's definitely up there in age. So how those things adjust. And then, again, like you said, Kellen Moore is going to push the ball down the field more. Obviously, a higher ADOT means less low ADOT throws. Austin Eckler could be the prime loser when it comes to that. How are you going to implement Quentin Johnson's offense?
Yeah. Well, and what are they saying about Eckler's role? Like, what do we hear about Eckler's role if there's fewer dump downs and more down the field? Because they're obviously still going to get him involved. It just may look different.
Well, and it sounds like he's going to show up to camp, but his tweets lately have been a little aggressive. He said the Chargers wouldn't pay him more, but they were looking for high-profile picks for him, and he said that doesn't make sense, which it doesn't.
Yeah.
But is he going to show up to camp? I don't think he's going to hold out, but where does the situation go? How unhappy is he? Because that RB room behind him is atrocious.
Yeah.
We think.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it has been ever since Melvin Gordon left. There hasn't been a second guy that's truly emerged and been reliable on that team. Dalton, are there any other storylines that you just want to toss out there real quick before we get out of here in the NFC?
I mean, in the NFC West, a fun one I want to talk about was, does Clayton Tune start for the Arizona Cardinals or Sam Bradford?
That's very exciting. You're right.
Doesn't matter too much. Going to the NFC South, I thought about talking about the Bucs and Baker Mayfield, whether or not he comes out looking good. And then in the NFC East, the last one I had was what the Giants are doing with their wide receiver room, because.
And also, are the Giants signing anybody to replace Saquon? Is going to be one to follow if Saquon keeps not reporting.
Yeah, but with Jalen Hyatt reportedly running with the threes, there's value to be had there because of how good their coaching is. And I was interested who it was, and then I wrote the names down and deleted it because I didn't want to talk about any of those players.
Paris Campbell's going to have he's on the Giants, right? That's where he went?
He is on the Giants.
He's going to have a huge – they were talking about him as running up in the backfield. It's all making sense. The Saquon holdout.
Paris Deebo Campbell.
That's right. And on that note, that's going to do it for episode 109 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Link to all of those things, as always, is in the show notes. Our show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of that good stuff. We'll be back next week with what was a very fun show last year, the ranks debate between Dalton and I. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.